Good morning, everyone. My name is Jagjit Sareen. I'm Director of Finance at International Solar Alliance Secretariat. And it's my immense pleasure to welcome you all this morning and welcome in particular to the excellencies, dignitaries, and participants of RE Invest version 3. You all have been having very interesting sets of discussions for the last 2 years, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy the discussion we're going to have in next 1.5 hours. This is one of the visionary topics in the space or global discourse on renewable energy, one sun, one world, one grid. Honorable Prime Minister of India at the first assembly of International Solar Alliance in 2018 laid out a vision that we should be connecting various grids powered by solar energy across the globe with a powerful idea, which we all know so obvious, but the way he put it, sun never sets, and we should harness the energy of sun, connecting various continents through the existing grids and new grids so that we could tackle the issues of energy transition for climate change, but more importantly, energy access issues for the people who don't have access to any form or cleaner forms of energy. So, and what we have been trying to do at International Solar Alliance in partnership with the World Bank and with the support of MNRE, the nodal ministry from Government of India, to realize this vision and bring the building blocks together. In that endeavor, today's panel brings together the best possible brains in the world who could help us, guide us how to take these building blocks, bring them together, and bring this vision to reality. The way we have structured this session is we will begin with the welcome and setting scene of this discussion with remarks from Honorable DG Isa, and then we will invite a keynote speaker, a panel discussion, and then we would have closing remarks. My hope is that we all listening to this discussion would gain immensely from the wisdom of the panelists, and my dear colleague Amit, who's going to moderate this session, would provide us enough time for a discussion and Q&A. So with those words, let me invite His Excellency Shri Upendra Tripathi, Director General, International Solar Alliance, to provide his welcome address and set the scene for our discussion today. Honorable DG, sir, floor is yours.
Thank you, Jagjit. Thank you, Jagjit. Thank you for the remarks. And I must also mention that he's the most active member of ISA to be involved in this whole enterprise about even finalizing the bid that is going to take place soon. Well, friends, in such a friendly panel I call friends, I don't call excellencies, and honorable minister is of course today not there, and His Excellency Ambassador of France has not been able to join. But everyone in the panel is actually a very active player in this area, and Amit has been moderating. Nick, of course, is an old friend, and Srikanth is our chairman and managing director of one of the major enterprises if the grid comes that is going to play. And Anita will find out the finance. Apart from the World Solar Bank, maybe together they'll put in the money. And Professor Baer will, of course, be the intellectual brain behind it. He has done so much of work. And Professor Lawrence and Excellency Gavin, of course, they are the main supporters. If at all we are going to have the one sun, one world, and one grid, the way it comes, and the World Solar Bank to be a source of capital for this, it is going to be very important. But today I wanted to just start with two things to set the context. One is, of course, a very tiny electronic toy. If you can see this, you recognize the figure. This is of Einstein. I got it from Lima. Now, why am I displaying it? If you look at the hand that hits the head, the finger, it is powered through the small panel at the feet of Einstein. And it doesn't require sunlight. It requires, the home light is fine. But the moment home light falls on this, the finger sticks the brain, trying to rethink about E is equal to mc square. This quotation I'm giving because this thing I'm mentioning because I try to find out the solar revolution, how it is affecting every sector of life. At the micro scale, we are talking about some 4 million people in the solar sector, but look at the reach, even electronic toys. And I always show my electronic solar watch also. I'm not showing today. And the other interesting incident I wanted to tell you, yesterday I had a discussion with a friend of mine from UNEP, with whom we are going to do a study about solar waste. We call it, recyclable thing. And then he just got me the figures, and the very interesting figures. And in 1 megawatt of solar plant that we put today, what is the recyclable material that we will get when after 30 years it goes down? And the figures are astonishing. In 1 megawatt of solar, we will get back. It says 70 tons of glass. We'll get back 56 tons of steel. We'll get back 47 tons of concrete. We'll get back 19 tons of aluminium. We'll get back 7 tons of silicon and 7 tons of copper and 6 tons of plastic. And that we are getting at the end of 30th year. Now, we are now together trying to work out 30 years back, what are the price of these metals? And when we recover, what price we get. So how waste itself is going to be a very important source of revenue. And when you look at the big graph of 600 gigawatt global, and after 30 years, we take it for recycling. And within these two, in fact, if we are talking about the one sun, one world, one grid, of course, as I told you, it is not going to be a ring around the Earth like rings around Saturn. It is going to be a zigzag thing like interstellar dateline, connecting hotspots. And it is not merely solar, it will also connect solar derivatives. And there is hardly anything, it doesn't, including green hydrogen, will be a solar derivative. And so the whole point is, we are looking at not only investment, we are looking at employment, and we are looking at the ecological or environmental benefits of the grid, the one sun, one world, one grid. And the report that we are going to generate now, thanks to World Bank's Lighthouse money that has come from DFID, it is going to capture all these three components. What are the whether we take in 2 stages or 3 stages or multiple stages, what are the financial implications of this? What are the technologies required? And in a sense, what is the investment scenario? And how much employment is going to generate in a hungry world? I mean, the world is looking for employment. And then to what extent the sun can enter into the areas, not only of power generation, of the homes or houses or buildings or construction, and of course, transportation and heating and cooling. Now, these are the major chunks, world over. These are going to come up. And the backbone for this will be the one sun, one world, one grid, which of course, the way Nick's idea of the Green Grid Alliance, which connects even mini grids. And actually, that's a very flexible way of looking at the whole thing. It's like a vein system in the human body, everything, feeds to a central nervous system. And, but then why this? If you look at ISA, we have a fundamental pricing philosophy. In fact, today we're talking about the philosophy of the sun, making it a public good. But at the beginning, I remember in 2014, when I joined as secretary in the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, we were all struggling. You used to go to the power ministry and request for 10 megawatt of coal-based power, so that we mix 1 megawatt of solar energy, and the mixed energy, we call bundled energy, we sell at a lesser price. And today it is reverse. Today NTPC is putting a lot of solar to reduce the cost of their coal-based power. And last week, 2 rupees per kilowatt hour, 2 rupees in Indian currency is pretty small amount, and that is, that is historical. The way prices have gone down. And then from that grid parity, Today we are talking about a different parity. We are talking about kerosene parity. Why? Because 2 billion women are without energy access. 700 million people have no access to electricity. Now, unless you bring down the market for them to reach out, they will be always outside it. No amount of charity or grant can actually give them light. And I appreciate the World Bank's report, which says in the business as usual course by 2030, we will still be have 650 million or 700 million people without access to electricity. The way ISA would try to change it is through two ways. You go for demand aggregation, and in fact, I'm very happy Jagjit is here because he's the one who is behind the aggregation of demand for 47 million home power systems, and ESL is helping us. We do it in, I mean, my view was that we do it one go, 47 million, but then practical as he planned in 5 years of 9 million, but it is reversible. We can change it later. But the first, next, in 15 months' time, we are going to bring down the price of home power systems. And home power system is not merely 5 LED bulbs. We are talking about a solar refrigerator. We are talking about even a solar radio. We are talking about a fridge, if possible, and a fan, of course, in different, climates. So, but we are sure, like our exercise in solar pumps, where we aggregated demand across 22 countries, and of course, lighting is for 53 countries. There also, the price of solar pumps were brought down by almost 40%. And today they call it ISA price. In many countries, they use it for local procurement, and that's a very good exercise. And this essentially becomes the reach of the thing that we are talking about. And in the context that the solar power is growing, in the context that the prices are coming down, and from kerosene parity, we are telling something called near zero cost. And in fact, if you deflate the Indian currency of 2 rupees over 30 years by just deflating with the inflation rate of say 3% or 4%, or even the treasury bond discount rate, you'll find it is near zero already. And that is where the important thing comes, that solar has set in, and sun, as they say, the best socialist, which doesn't discriminate among rich and poor, urban and rural. And in that direction, we all play a very important role. And today's panel, which actually we had one more panel during the World Solar Technology Summit of ISA, and it brought out very important themes. And here I would also would like to mention the idea of Nick, as a friend I call him, but Mr. Nicholas Dunlap, his Green Grid Alliance is a great idea. He has been able to approach many governments, bring them along the line that we do need a Green Grid Alliance, if not, merely as an alliance to promote grids, but now that it has got a better footage, it can actually be linked to the One Sun, One World, One Grid. And we plan that in the next COP 26, Glasgow, to bring out something called a Glasgow Charter, to cover not only the things of One Sun, One World, One Grid, not only the World Solar Bank, and I'll be very happy both can be launched at a very, summit at Glasgow, the World Solar Bank, as well as the One Sun, One World, One Grid, and the Green Grid Alliance together. Thank you all. Wish you all the best. I'm sure it is going to be a very good discussion, stimulating and very useful. And I'm sure Secretary Chaturvedi will be joining soon. And his presence itself is a great thing, because our partnership is with World Bank, with MNRE, so that to take this idea further. And I'm very happy to say that ISA is playing a big role. And as the Honorable Prime Minister of India pointed out, these powerful ideas of ISA itself, or of the World Solar Bank, which the UN Secretary General tweeted as a 21st century idea. And I'm very happy Minister Sharma from UK from day one, and even the other day he talked about the World Solar Bank, because we understand the importance of capital if you think of a big project, and to channelize capital, to gather capital, and to support projects, it's a must. And And that is, I think, we are in the right direction. Thank you all once again, and all the best for the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Honorable Director General, for underlining the importance of this initiative, highlighting the progress made in other initiatives at ISA, which are linked to this big, bold idea, and also linking it to the multilateral initiatives outside ISA framework. That gives me a perfect segue to invite my colleague from the British High Commission, Mr. Gavin McGilvray. Before I give him the floor, let me provide a bit of a context. At the third assembly of ISA, the assembly member states, they approved this initiative as a multilateral initiative within ISA framework. But also they're invited the COP president, the incoming COP president, His Excellency Alok Sharma, who would be presiding over COP26. And he outlined that the COP presidency sees this initiative along with the World Solar Bank as one of the two key initiatives to be launched, if you will, at the COP, highlighting the importance of this initiative in the multilateral efforts to combat climate change, in particular efforts toward clean energy transition. So let's hear from Gavin how the UK government and their approach towards bringing the whole community together again in Glasgow, how they see this and how we could bring our efforts together. Over to you, Gavin.
Jagjit, thank you very much, and Upendraji, thank you. And as you said, it's good to now feel that we're amongst friends as we talk about these issues together. And thank you for your opening remarks. You have such a creative turn of mind, as well as reminding us of the fundamentals. And thank you for inviting me to share some thoughts this morning. I'd like to touch on two themes. One is my country's excitement about the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative, and our enthusiasm to explore it rigorously and work out a way of making this dream a reality. And then a few points, and in a way these are personal points, suggestions from the non-expert that I am about how we might go about this. So on the first theme, we the UK believe that the One Sun, One World, One Grid idea is one that is burgeoning with potential, and we are committed to partnering with the International Solar Alliance, with the Government of India, with the World Bank, and with others partners as they come on board to examine it in every which way to find out how we can make it technically, economically, financially, and politically feasible. And with this concept of the One Sun, One World, One Grid, Prime Minister Modi ji has yet again sparked an inspirational and catalytic train of thinking of global dimensions, as he did with, of course, the International Solar Alliance itself and with the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure. And as you, the ISA, note in your excellent background paper for this event, and I quote from that, One Sun, One World, One Grid can catalyze investment in sustainable energy solutions, expand energy access, create jobs, improve health, make economies more competitive and resilient, and advance the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, what's not to like about all of that? And one way that One Sun, One World, One Grid can do this is by reducing costs for everybody. Evidence shows that every time the global deployment of solar power doubles, its price has fallen by 28%. And One Sun, One World, One Grid will surely have a similar effect on other technologies, perhaps most notably battery technology. And of course, One Sun, One World, One Grid will help diversify global energy sources, just as the UK, with our considerable investment in offshore and increasingly onshore wind generation capacity, aspires to become what Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister, calls the Saudi Arabia of wind, So India, with its huge achievements and further plans for harnessing the power of the sun, is becoming, or maybe has already become, the Saudi Arabia of solar power, a global solar superpower, and with potential to become a global exporter of solar power. And the technology is there. Australia recently granted major project status to an ambitious $16 billion plan to export power from a giant solar farm in the country's north to Southeast Asia via an undersea cable. The national grid in my country, the United Kingdom, already operates 3 international interconnectors connecting the United Kingdom with France, with Netherlands and Belgium, and 3 more are under construction, including one of the world's longest subsea power cables, some 470 miles long, connecting Britain and Denmark to share renewable energy between these 2 countries. And nearer to hand, nearer here, we, the UK, are supporting the Central Asia, South Asia CASA 1000 project, which is one, as I'm sure you know better than me, one of the first major energy infrastructure projects connecting this region, which will allow countries of the region to trade and transmit renewable hydropower, electricity, and which will constitute a fundamental building block for the Central Asia, South Asia regional energy market. Okay, so that was my first theme. My second theme, how to find a way to make a reality of the dream. And I know I'm preaching to the converted when I say we must find a way to be thorough and realistic in our feasibility and design work, to progress One Sun, One World, One Grid from an exciting concept into an operational reality. The World Bank and the ISA feasibility study will establish the vision, and we are happy that the complementary study we are funding on the Gulf India interconnector feasibility study will support that. Based on our experience, I see 3 points in particular that we must keep in mind as we shape the vision and take it forward. The first is, how do we secure political buy-in? Again, I know I'm teaching grandmothers to suck eggs when I say that political will at the highest level of governments will be absolutely critical to move forward this concept at pace. And we know that Modi ji is committed to this idea. We know the support that our top politicians in the UK have signalled to this concept, and we need to work together to bring other countries on board as well. And navigating the geopolitics and the political economy considerations will play, of course, a vital role in securing the support of yet more countries, and will be important at every stage during the gestation and lifespan of One Sun, One World, One Grid, during design, during the time in which we work out the terms of trade and the dispute resolution mechanisms, and during construction and during operation. And we believe that political economy analysis should be integrated into all of the feasibility studies we do, better to understand the geopolitical considerations, better to work out how to manage the potential risks, but also how to maximize the potential opportunities. And equally, the countries participating in the feasibility and design work will need to avoid using their relative advantage in economic or market power to dominate the shaping of this vision or the terms of electricity trade. And checks and balances will have to be put in place so that once the grid is up and running, no participating country can use the economic or geopolitical strength to the disadvantage of others. So maybe it'd be good to think about us developing a political statement amongst the participating countries and entities to be announced at COP26, to be reiterated at other fora, committing all of us to the vision of One Sun, One World Grid, and that the whole initiative will be based on sound economic and commercial principles, and that the spirit of cooperation, the spirit of equitable outcomes will inform every aspect of the design and operation of One Sun, One World, One Grid. The second point that I want to talk about is how do we make this scheme attractive to the private sector? And given the need for capital, given the need for efficient management, we all know that we're going to need the private sector as a partner in all aspects of the grid, in generation, in transmission, in operation, in trading, international trading, and as providers of capital. And we know that these transmission lines, particularly the subsea ones, are investment heavy projects. In Europe, the North Sea Link, or the Norway-UK interconnector, is expected to cost €2 billion, and the CASA 1000 Central Asia South Asia interconnector project that I mentioned earlier will cost some $1.2 billion. So much of this we will need to think through with our prospective participants from the private sector. Questions like, what times and for which consumers will renewable energy from exporting countries become competitive to alternative power sources in the importing countries? Should the transmission line operator be government owned or privately owned? This debate we're having in Europe is a live one at the moment. Whether the power trading will be only physical, or could financial products like derivatives and swaps be included? And what laws, regulations, supervisory mechanisms in the participating countries, and maybe in international bodies as well, we will need to put in place beforehand, so that the renewable energy generators and transmission network investors are the investors in these two areas, in the grid in general, can be assured that, one, the infrastructure is utilized to the maximum, and two, they can recover their investment. But we also need to think about the regulatory and supervisory framework to ensure that private participants don't abuse their role, and they operate to the highest environmental, social, and governance standards. And then the third point is we must obviously think about partnerships and resources. We need to think clearly and creatively about what other partner countries, what other multilateral institutions, expert bodies, civil society entities we need to bring on board with their complementary strength and resources. And talking of resources, what resources will we need to bring the One Sun, One World, One Grid concept into reality? There's going to be a mass of technical studies. There's going to be a mass of investment needed just to initiate the project, to put in place the risk mitigation instruments. And we are already thinking, and we need to go on thinking about where these resources will come from. So an exciting adventure that we're all embarking on together, a real example of making a reality of Prime Minister Modi's idea of trusteeship towards the planet that he advanced at the recent G20 summit. And as the British Minister and COP26 President Alok Sharma said on several occasions, we, the UK, are committed to exploring this idea in the most positive and constructive manner. And this will be a marathon, not a sprint. We will need patience, we will need perseverance, resilience, and stamina to bring the vision into fruition. And we'll need the very best minds. We will need to bring the very best minds in the world to bear. And I'm really glad that we have several of these very best minds assembled for today's session. And I'm looking forward very much to hearing what they have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a great keynote address laying out in detail, very substantive points, which we all should be very, very mindful. But the 2 points which kind of stayed with me more than others is the kind of rigor we need in thinking through various aspects, especially the economic and financial aspects of realizing this vision, so that this study looks at it in a very thorough and rigorous way. Second is to assemble the best brains. And at ISA, working with World Bank and the Government of India and partners like UK and others, we are thinking of creating a global advisory council, which would be our sounding board, bringing the best and experienced brains around this consortium, which would do the nuts and bolts study, but a broader constellation of expertise to guide this process so that we could bring to Glasgow a very refined product which heads of states, heads of MDBs, private sector CEOs could agree to take forward in a very concrete way. And just being mindful of this rigor and bringing best brains from the day go, we have partnered with the World Bank and Government of India to get this feasibility study conducted. And on that note, let me invite my good friend Amit Jain, who is my counterpart in the bank leading this work, to moderate a great panel we have today. And bring various aspects of grid interconnection, from the visions to financing to the theory behind this vision, to the benefit of all participants. I just want to check before I give this floor to Amit that Honorable Secretary has joined, I believe. I don't see his video, but I believe he is patiently listening. He would be providing closing remarks and providing GOI vision to this great initiative. With these words, let me give the floor to Amit, who will be introducing the panelists and then moderating the session. Over to you, Amit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jagjit, my colleague and my friend. Let me make one confession before I start, that His Excellency Director General Shri Upendra Tripathi ji has hired me as a permanent moderator for this session. So it doesn't matter what happens to my World Bank job, I will be always a moderator to His Excellency Upendra Tripathi ji. So my job is secured. But today my job is easier, DG, because Honorable Prime Minister, in his opening speech, the first line what he mentioned was the vision about one sun, one world, one grid. And then thereafter, Honorable Minister gave an update on One Sun initiative, where he mentioned the procurement process for the feasibility study of One Sun is underway. So the 25,000 people who were connected to the inaugural and the opening ceremony already know about what One Sun means and what is the current progress on the One Sun, One World initiative. So we have two visionaries who are guiding us on this global and mammoth initiative. And as Jagjit mentioned, let me also acknowledge the two biggest cheerleaders of One Sun, One World initiative, Secretary MNRE Shri Indu Shekhar Chakrabarti ji and Director General Upendra Tripathi ji. Now, with this, people who are connected for this session may already know about what this initiative is, but very briefly, in a nutshell, it means a modernized global energy systems, which is based on three pillars: smart investments, investments like pension funds and global sovereign funds, on which we have Ms. Anita George from CDPQ, where we believe these investments will be going into smart technologies like renewable energy and storage. We believe the electrons flowing through the One Sun, One World initiative will be only renewable and sustainable. So on the smart technologies, this is the second pillar of One Sun initiative, which will be driven by HVDC and other smart meters, SCADA system and other technologies, where we have the POWERGRID CMD, Mr. Shrikant, and Mr. Nick from UK, who will be sharing the technical and the smart technological ideas with us. The third pillar is smart minds, which was very clearly outlined by Gavin in his opening presentation. Anything of this scale is not possible without smart minds, and we have the privilege of having Professor Christian Bayer and Professor Kazmarowski to guide us on what renewables, solar, wind, storage will look like 10, 15, 20 years down the line. So I'm very honored and privileged to moderate this session with these global smart minds. And the way One Sun initiative works is it targets to transfer the electrons from Japan early in the morning to Southeast Asia, then to South Asia, to Africa, and then to the West. So as the sun transcends from Japan to US, this initiative wants to bring transferring of electrons from one region to another on the basic concept of sun never sets, and also the other way around. So it takes care of different time zones and geographies through a globally interconnected grid. This initiative also aims participation of over 140 countries going towards SDG goals of energy security, energy access, and clean transition. So with this brief introduction, I would like to move forward with the panel discussion. As I move towards the panelists, I will briefly introduce them and ask them the questions, and we will have 10 to 15 minutes for the Q&A, depending on how much time we have left. Now, Mr. Srikanth is the Chairman and Managing Director of POWERGRID Corporation. Mr. Srikanth, as you have heard, One Sun initiative is all about interconnecting grids or interconnectors. With an experience of installing and managing over 160,000 circuit kilometer transmission lines, I repeat again, POWERGRID have installed and managed over 160,000 circuit kilometer transmission lines. You are probably the best person to answer and tell us whether it is feasible or not. POWERGRID is a globally known name in the area of power transmission. It has also experience in cross-border power transmission with Bangladesh, Nepal, and Bhutan, close to 3 gigawatts. And I understand there are plans to expand into Sri Lanka and also Myanmar. So what do you think in the phase 1 of One Sun initiative? We are looking at connecting India with Southeast Asia via Nepal and Myanmar. In your experience as the MD of POWERGRID, please shed some light on the technical and commercial viability of such transmission projects. Mr. Srikanth, over to you.
Thank you, Amit. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The cross-border interconnections, as we all know, leverage on the diversity of climatic conditions, time zones, resource availability, economic conditions, and so on. And the benefits are immense in both in terms of sustainability, like it promotes renewable energy, and also economically it also makes sense. And thus this One Sun, One World, One Grid initiative is anchored both on very strong fundamentals of sustainability and economy. Coming to the experience of POWERGRID, which is the largest transmission utility in India and also one in the world, we have experience of several cross-border connections with Bhutan, Nepal, and Bangladesh, and one small one with Myanmar also. About 2 gigawatts of power can be imported from Bhutan, 1.1
Jagjit, we lost Mr. Srikanth, right?
It seems so. Maybe in 10 seconds, if we don't get him back, maybe you want to move to the next speaker.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah. Am I audible? Yeah. These interconnections with the countries we are experiencing have benefits, economic benefits to these countries, as well as promote sustainability, because it is promoting renewable energy. The hydro generation from Bhutan is imported and is reducing carbon emissions, because otherwise Bangladesh would have had to burn more diesel or natural gas to get this power. And we are also contemplating more interconnections with Bhutan and Nepal. They are under construction, and discussions are on way for Myanmar and Sri Lanka, as Amit has mentioned. Now, if we look at it, rather there are several things which have gone into these interconnections to make a success of these interconnections. Because as we look at the concept of one sun, one world, and one grid, there will have to be a lot of I think we can draw lessons from these interconnections. What has gone to the success of this? One is that we have a very robust institutional framework comprising different committees for coordination at the highest level in the government. The secretaries of the both countries, we have a joint committees for this. Then on the technical side, there are committees, and then operational side also there are groups formed to discuss the nitty-gritty of day-to-day operations. So there is a robust institutional mechanism to address the various issues. Then there is also the regulations, framework of regulations which are prepared by issued by the Central Electricity Regulatory Commission. These also have facilitated these cross-border interconnections. And of course, there is a support of the multilateral agencies which nurtured and facilitated these interconnections. And therefore, there is I think we can draw lessons when we look at the One Sun, One World, One Grid initiatives and how to create these kind of interconnections. I mean, these framework to do the institutional alignment of interests and that both from technical, operational, as well as the larger strategic initiatives. Coming to these Southeast Asian interconnections, which is, I think, part of the first phase of the OSOWOG initiative. Way back in 2018, POWERGRID did a study of the Trans-Asian grid covering 17 countries in the Central Asia, SAARC, as well as the Southeast Asia. These countries traverse about 64 degrees of longitude, or a 4-hour time difference. And considering the expected load growth, diversity of resources, a potential for cross-border transfer of nearly 100 gigawatts was identified. And in terms of the social cost of carbon terms, the benefit expected out of these interconnections was about $26 in today's terms, if I may put it, per megawatt hour, compared to additional investment of transmission cost of just $10. So there is an immense benefit overall when we look at these global interconnections as well. So there is, in my view, technically there is no constraint in terms of this. It is a very much feasible solutions are available, both in terms of AC interconnections as well as DC interconnections. There are benefits in terms of grid balancing, in terms of reducing investments in spinning reserves or such balancing requirements which can be avoided in investments. And it is a technically commercially feasible solutions can be found out for these interconnections. Having gone already to Bangladesh and going to Myanmar in the next step, it is very much possible to go down and connect all the way up to Singapore. There is no need for even any undersea connection here. It is the land overhead transmission lines can take you there. We can use the benefit of the CASA 1000 project which Mr. Gavin has referred. There is also a SAARC interconnections available, and then the Asian power grid which is available. So these interconnections which exist or which are under development can be very well intertwined and roped in to form the OSOWOG initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shrikant. I will start from where you stopped by saying technically it is feasible to connect India with Southeast Asia. What you did not mention is geopolitically whether it is feasible or not. And there is one person on this panel who loves to talk about geopolitics and politics. Mr. Nicholas Dunlop, his actually CV mentions that he is a global known expert on geopolitics, and climate parliament and politics goes together. So, Mr. Nick, I understand you and your team has been working on initiative connecting the Western India with Gulf, which is actually the second phase of the One Sun initiative. And I always give this example. Currently, Rajasthan and Gujarat has 10 to 15 gigawatts of in-form renewable energy operating. And if everything goes well, the ambitious government of India plans, in the next 5 to 10 years, we will have 40 to 50 gigawatts of renewable energy in these two states itself. Of course, because they have desert and lot of wind available. So we have three options to transfer this power. One to Delhi, second to Mumbai, because these are demand centers. The third option, which the One Sun initiative will consider, is whether we can transfer this power to the Gulf. When you answer this question, please answer from both the technical and the geopolitics side, because reports also say that undersea cables are 3 to 6 times more expensive than on-land cables. And secondly, from a geopolitical point of view, how feasible it is to connect India with the Gulf nations.
Well, thanks, Amit. I'm not sure that I am an expert on geopolitics. I'm not sure where that was written down, but what I suspect I am an expert on is politicians. I've been working with politicians all my life in different ways internationally, and I must know something about them. And speaking of politicians, I really want to start by congratulating the Prime Minister of India and Minister R.K. Singh and you, Mr. Chaturvedi, and your team at MNRE and in the Ministry of Power for developing this really brilliant initiative. It is exactly the kind of bold thinking that we need if we're going to accelerate the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy in time to prevent a climate catastrophe. And nothing is more urgent than that. We're hearing from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that we have a very tight carbon budget that we have to stay within if we're going to keep global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees. And they're also telling us that if we go beyond 1.5 degrees, hundreds of millions and even billions of people are going to suffer very severe consequences. And what this means is we have to run everything on clean electricity. We have to electrify transport. We have to electrify heating of buildings in cold climates like the one I'm sitting in right now. And anything we can't do with electricity, we need to do with green hydrogen that we make with clean electricity by electrolyzing water. That's the broad picture. And the question then is, where does all that energy come from? Maybe 20% of it, Christian will have better numbers than me, but I would guess it's something in the order of 20% could come from rooftop solar. Most of the rest has to come from large-scale solar and large-scale wind, with hydro playing a balancing role. And so that's why we need the continental grids. We need the continental grids partly because solar and wind are a much more reliable supply of energy if you harness them over a wide area. Wind moves around. Solar, if you can connect up time zones with east-west connections, you extend the length of the solar day for everyone. But there's also another very important reason why we need these continental scale and interregional grids, and that is that we're going to have to cover a lot of area with solar power stations, with solar being one of the workhorses of the future world economy. And in order to do that, we must not build all those power stations on agricultural land. In a warming world, we're going to have more and more trouble with food production. We already have trouble with food production, and that's going to get worse.
So we need to do it in the deserts, in unproductive land, and keep our productive land for food. So we've got to wire everybody up to the deserts. And there are whole regions like Southeast Asia or like Europe, where I live, that simply don't have a desert. They have to connect to the places that do, like India or North Africa. So my answer on the geopolitics is, or the economics, we simply have to do this. We have to do it. There is no other way that we're going to save the planet from a real climate catastrophe. And we're just very fortunate that solar and wind are now the cheapest sources, that they're cheaper still in the places with the most abundant resources, like deserts and windy coastlines and so on. So by wiring the world up in the way the Prime Minister of India is proposing, we get cheap, reliable, unlimited power. Then the question is, how do we take this forward in moving from talk to action? We've got the two studies that have already been mentioned. The one ISA is commissioning now, and the one the UK government is funding, which already has built a model for trading solar energy between India and the Gulf, and that model already is showing reduced system costs by putting those undersea cables across the Arabian Sea. But beyond that, in our last discussion about One Sun, One World, One Grid in the ISA Assembly, Minister R.K. Singh and the British representative John Merton both said, as others have already said today, that the COP26 is a perfect opportunity to move this forward and get other countries involved and build a coalition of the willing to implement One Sun, One World, One Grid. So the ISA and the Climate Parliament are working together on this, planning what we're calling for the moment a Green Grid Initiative, but it could be called a One Sun Initiative. The exact form will depend on consultations with governments beforehand, but as we see it, it should certainly include, if possible, a group of heads of government, presidents and prime ministers in Glasgow a year from now, issuing what we're calling for the moment, Upendra and I have been discussing this, a One Sun Charter, a short declaration, just as Gavin was suggesting too, in which they would declare their commitment to the goals of One Sun, One World, One Grid, and state their intention to work together to implement it through a series of working groups. Secondly, we should have a series of meetings right there in Glasgow that build support for the concept. A One Sun Legislators Summit for MPs, a business roundtable, a meeting of researchers who have a very important role to play in this. And then we should launch a series of ongoing working groups that address different aspects of the agenda, whether it's different, focusing on specific priority transmission routes and building the business case to attract private investment, working on harmonizing grid codes. Minister R.K. Singh, in our last discussion at the ISA Assembly, mentioned that solar microgrids should be part of this agenda. The interface between electric vehicles and smart grids. As Upendra mentioned, we've already discussed this kind of approach with a number of energy ministers from about 20 countries and found a very positive response. Minister R.K. Singh mentioned that in the ISA Assembly, there was a widespread feeling that the time for this idea has come, and the ministers participating there were also very positive. The UK team preparing COP26 is keenly interested in exploring it, as Gavin has been saying. So I have no doubt at all that we can put together a really good group of countries in Glasgow to get behind the Prime Minister's vision. And I have equally little doubt that there is really nothing more important that we could be doing right now, because building those new large-scale smart grids is absolutely key to enabling the world economy to run on solar power and what Upendra called earlier its derivatives like wind and hydro. This is something that has to be at the absolute top of the list of priorities for the world's leaders at this point, as we look at the extremely tight time frame that we have for making the global energy transition. And I think I'll stop there on it.
Thanks a lot, Nick. We will definitely need your help and political capital to bring global leaders all across the world to have a meaningful conversation at Glasgow. Now, Nick, but let me be clear and tell you one thing, and I believe you would agree with me. Whatever research we do in form of the vision and the roadmap document at the One Sun, and whatever document you prepared as part of the Green Grid Alliance, these are documents, these are implementation plans. This will require billions of dollars to implement this. And I see only one person on this panel who can give us the billions of dollars. I don't have any. I don't know if Nick has any, but one person which has a balance sheet of billions of dollars, Miss Anita George from CDPQ. I'll try to convince her if she can cut a check at the end of this panel discussion. But she has been my mentor for last 10 years. You also talk about vision, Nick. In 2009 and 10, Miss Anita George as IFC invested in Azure Power 10 years back when people like me did not know S of solar. So she is that visionary. And also going forward now, she's heading CDPQ globally. So she has been a very early starter in the solar investments way back in 2009 and 10. Now, Anita, you have been working globally, and when we look at a particular country like India, usually we say the risks in renewable energy are off-taker risk. We talk about renegotiation of PPAs, or we talk about land and transmission risk. But here we are talking about cross-border projects like Mr. Shrikant mentioned, or connecting India to the Gulf or to Southeast Asian countries. How does a global investor like CDPQ perceives risk for a cross-border or even cross-continent renewable energy projects?
Thank you very much, Amit. Can you hear me well? Okay, great. So I have to start by thanking you for including me in this very, very exciting discussion. And I really want to recognize the efforts of all of you who have been contributing to this idea. The Honorable Secretary MNRE, the Honorable DG, Mr. Tripathi, and all of you on this panel from different parts of the world whose contribution I think is absolutely critical. And the reason I say this so extensively of the few minutes that I have to speak is honestly, I think every once in a while, there is an amazing idea that emerges, which is really propagated by brave people, courageous people, which are all of you. And then once it's conceptualized, once it's figured out, that is when us financiers with the billions of dollars will even lift our heads and take a look. When I look back, I think the only other equivalent initiative that I can think of is the internet and the World Wide Web. And you know how that has changed the world. And I truly, truly believe that if we can get the One Sun, One World, One Grid off the ground, it's going to be another such transformational initiative. So if I had a hat, I'm taking it off to each of you who has already been contributing to this really revolutionary and transformational idea. So I'll start actually by giving you a little small description of CDPQ, Caisse des dépôts et placements du Québec. We are the second largest pension fund manager of Canada with about 330 billion Canadian dollars under management. But more important than that, we have always been a big believer in renewable energy, in really promoting activities and investments that address climate change. And this is something that we have been doing also for a large part of our existence, which started in 1965. And something which many of you may have heard of CDPQ is that we are part of the Net Zero Alliance. We have our own targets towards reducing emissions, etc. But what is not known as well is that each and every individual employee's remuneration is based on whether we achieve our targets on reducing emissions and increasing green investments. So everyone from the youngest analyst to the most senior person's remuneration is influenced by how well we do on our commitments towards climate change. I would answer your question, Amit, by saying that, you know, I always start by asking, whose money are we investing? And for me, it is the money of ordinary citizens, teachers, government officers, policemen, you know, what ordinary citizens' savings for when they retire from their jobs. So therefore, it is, as to quote Prime Minister Modi, he referred once to it as pure money. And that is something that we as investors who have been given the responsibility of investing this money, we have to think about every day. Whose money are we investing? And coming from that perspective, we have to make sure that we are addressing all the risks, and you outlined them very clearly, very briefly, Amit, which is the off-taker risk, the payment security mechanisms that are required, and of course, in a cross-border situation as we are contemplating here, the geopolitical risks as well. I will start by saying that the most fundamental risk is the off-taker risk, and whether we are financing, you know, the UK electricity entities off-taker risk, or the one in Dubai, or the one in India, in every one of them, the fundamentals have to be looked at, which is, does this entity have the wherewithal, the cash flows, to be able to make the payments regularly and on time? The second thing, even within countries, for projects which are not cross-border, but within countries, the sanctity of contract is something that we have to really put a lot of weight on, because that's the only evidence or track record as to whether the entity that signs the power purchase agreement or that grants the license is actually consistent and has stuck to the contract that has been signed. And I cannot underscore more important this point is, because it really leads to the next point, which is the heart of the question you asked, of cross-border. Now, in cross-border, it's not just one entity's commitment to sanctity of contract. It's not just one entity's ability to pay. It's not just one entity's cash flows and credibility and track record. Here we are looking at multiple entities across geographies, and therefore geopolitical risk becomes a very real and very, I would say, relevant risk to any investor and financier. And we look at it in terms of really the contractual agreements and what is it that could mitigate the typical issues that arise in geopolitical situations where you have countries who from time to time may fall out in their relationships with other countries, and therefore how does this get addressed? And I would say in this project, addressing this aspect is going to be very, very critical. I think institutions like the World Bank and other bilaterals and multilaterals can play a very important role by making sure that there are enough financial protections to the investors who are backing such a project. And this has to be above and beyond the normal geopolitical relationships that exist between different countries. And the most suitable entities that we've seen who can do this are actually the multilaterals. And I think here the multilaterals have to really step up in playing that role. I was very much involved in the financing for the CASA project as the Senior Director for Energy in the World Bank. And I can tell you that that was a project where even to get EPC contractors to come in and to build the part of the transmission lines in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and in other countries which at that point in time were experiencing conflicts was very, very difficult. We had to individually go and literally plead with the EPC contractors, the global players, to say, look, this is a worthwhile project. It can really bring in transformational impacts. So please come in and bid for it. Even when we had the financing from entities like the World Bank. So here again, I would say that one has to really dig through the layers of risk to be able to come up with a solution that is palatable and meets the requirements of investors worldwide. One way that I see this being done is if we have in the initial phase, the multilaterals, bilaterals, government to government, really building the basic infrastructure and setting up the interconnectivity and the way in which the electrons will move, the contractual and financial arrangements that will be in place, the payment security mechanisms that will be in place. And then you could definitely bring in for post-construction risk institutional investors who, once they see that this has been set, there's a track record, there is electrons flowing through this one grid, they will be able to step up. And I give the great example of POWERGRID. When the World Bank first financed the POWERGRID, it really helped to set up the institution, to set up the ESG requirements. As Mr. Gilray mentioned, that is something which is, you want this to be sustainable in every which way. So the ESG aspects are also very, very important. But once all that happened with POWERGRID was able, after establishing their track record, to access funds from institutional investors, from the capital markets. And that is the way I see this grid as well evolving, that once the sort of most high elements of risks are addressed with institutions that have a development mandate, then we can bring in other institutions and the capital markets like green bonds, etc., to replace the original financing that was put in place. So let me stop there and hand over to you.
Thanks a lot, Anita. So Jagjit has sent me 2 messages on WhatsApp. First, we are running late. So I would request other panelists to please restrict to 3 to 4 minutes. The second message he has sent that Anita is managing $330 billion. How can we convince her to earmark $1 billion for One Sun, One World? So I'll have that discussion offline with you and Jagjit. Moving on, Professor Christian Breyer, he's the professor of solar economy at LUT University, Finland. his major expertise in the integrated research of technological and economic characteristics of renewable energy systems. So, Professor, what are your views on the role of a global interconnected grid as a solution to the problems discussed by the panel?
Yeah, first of all, many thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to discuss these outstanding questions with all of you. The very first point I would like to come to is that we have to understand the fundamental economics of solar. It's already low cost, and the cost continue to decrease and to go continuously down. Continuously down means -5 to -10% per year, and this continuously. And currently there is not yet seen a kind of a major limitation for the years to come. Years to come means 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And this is the one key driver. Then we have to understand that the sun is available practically all over the world. So everyone has access to the sun, as long as there is at least some limited area to get it harvested. These are first of all the roofs, or zero impact areas, and then other areas where we have no conflict of usage. And this, of course, further brings us to the point that the continued increase of efficiency of the technology is of substantial importance, because this reduces area impact. We found so far that typically on an average of countries, maybe 0.3, 0.4% of the area of the country will be needed. Needed means to have in the end 70 to 80% of all energy supply based on solar. Why all? It means in the end with progressive technologies, with what we call sector coupling, practically all parts of the overall energy system can be electrified, whether it's directly or indirectly. Directly means, for example, with electric vehicles, we can have seawater, reverse osmosis desalination, or heating if it's cold, with heat pumps and other options. And the rest indirectly. Indirectly means typically we go via green hydrogen, and then have green hydrogen as a platform for jet fuel, for chemicals, for green steel. So these are then all different applications. But of course, the low-cost basis of these solutions is low-cost green hydrogen, and low-cost green hydrogen is based on low-cost solar. This, of course, brings further technologies into play. These, of course, first of all, are the grids to balancing. However, these grids will be in the very end in a strong competition to extremely low-cost batteries. So this white elephant in the room was not mentioned by anyone before. So due to that, let me be the devil's advocate on that, because extremely low-cost batteries strongly limit the value add of grids that we found globally. So we did for practically all major regions in the world super grid studies. And what we found continuously is the larger is the solar share, and the more evenly means in particular over the year, solar energy is distributed, the less relevant are really long distance grids. Long distance means beyond 1,500 kilometers. So let's say within a radius of 1,000 kilometers, the grid is always a cost reducing component and super important. And in particular, we did very detailed studies on the case of India. I can tell you it's most important to balance the regions which are affected by the monsoon and not. And this makes a difference. Because the non-affected regions finally would support those which are affected. And this is again such a seasonal effect as a rainy season we find over in other parts of the world. So concluding, please have batteries on the radar screen. And finally, batteries and grids are from analysis point of view strong competitors, but in reality, of course, it's a complementary technology. And in particular, the batteries also help to raise the utilization and capacity factors of grids, because a grid is extremely expensive if it's only used for 2,000 hours a year when a year has 8,760. So typically the capacity factors are on the level of 70%, and then a grid is super low cost, but otherwise it's expensive. And due to that, we will see this balancing effect also of utilization and make the grid capacities more effective. So to come to that point of view, we will find the beneficial effect of the grids everywhere, but please have in mind all regions in the world have access to sun. So I'm located in Finland, but the point is in the summer there is practically no stop of the sun. However, in the winter, of course, we have to pay a high price for that. But in principle, all the other regions have also the access. And then maybe even cost of capital may be a strong differentiator to get it lower cost in another region to pay for the transmission of electricity over longer distances if we have different relative cost of capital. So maybe to come to a kind of a summary, the grids have a really high value. However, take into account the interaction of the other components. And these are most importantly batteries to balance it, and all other technologies providing flexibility. And these are in particular electric vehicles, and that will be electrolyzers, because this is then the platform for the second most important energy carrier, green hydrogen, which is then used for various applications. But of course, the interconnection is very important to balance and even in emergency cases to support each other. And now I would like to hand over back to the moderator, and maybe there is some time for Q&A later on.
Thanks a lot, Professor Breuer, for being the devil's advocate. And I completely agree. The role of low-cost storage, what you mentioned, and the low capacity utilization factor of 17% will be very critical in determining the role of one sun, one world, one grid. With this, I will move to our last panelist, Professor Lawrence Kazwarski. He is Emeritus Research Fellow at NREL, Colorado. He has done extensive work in solar-related technologies. So, Professor, in our last discussion, you spoke about DC-based grids and terawatt versus terawatt hours challenge. I appreciate if you will throw some light on that.
Okay, I missed that. Was there a problem with the audio during that? I hope so. I hope it's. Can you hear me okay, Amit?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Great. So let me just start off by thanking the ISA for this opportunity. I must have involved several ISA activities through other organizations, and in fact, I think ISA is coming around to tell me if there are any problems that come up. ISA is coming to be one organization as well, representing all these renewable organizations, bringing them under an umbrella. To be part of this by ISIS, and I have to explain that's the International Solar Energy Society, not the other ISIS on the whole thing. And I think ISA brings a strength to this whole area of solar. I'm going to look at three things very, very quickly, three areas. The first one is technology, innovation, and vision on this. And this comes up to what was said before about smart minds, okay? And vision is the motivating force for innovation, of course. And expanding on this a little bit is that we have new devices coming onto the market that we are seeing. It really is expanding what we're able to do with, say, photovoltaics and other solar technologies. I'll mainly be talking about PV. You know, if we look at what's happened, we have bifacial modules, we have new systems, okay, reliability of these systems has been increasing considerably. If you look at work out of India, out of the NCPRE at IIT Bombay, that is supported by MNRE, okay, has been active in India and in the world in bringing about reliability for these. It's also, these systems have become bigger. Okay, if you look at Bada Park in India, about 2.4 gigawatts, or in Dubai, 5 gigawatts at a single site. So this is pretty incredible. Also, there's some diversity in these things, okay, about not using land that we heard before on the whole thing about floating photovoltaics on this whole thing. And I think India, for instance, has a plan that is that is putting in 200 to 300 megawatts of floating PV over this in the world, even more. It's a huge growing area for photovoltaics, certainly. But too often we give up on new ideas too early. Mrs. George said something very, very important, that funding is also very important to keep this in consistency. And one example is another area that has become big in the world now, and that's agrivoltaics. Okay, we don't have to think that these solar technologies are enemies of agriculture. We're starting to see an old idea that's coming back. Professor Gertzberger from Germany back in 1981 proposed this idea of uniting agriculture with photovoltaics, calling it agrivoltaics, and this is now growing as well because there is some meshing of the water food energy nexus here that certain crops do very, very well if the photovoltaics is implemented correctly in the field. The energy can be used for greenhouses, for pumping water and everything. So there are some links with that as well. Storage is huge. I was happy to hear that just now coming up on this whole thing for many things. And we also see a lot of work on new materials and new solar cell technologies. And you know, people say, we have silicon. Do we need anything more on this? Yes, innovation should not be put aside. Thank you, Mrs. George, on that as well, on this whole thing, because these things can change the way we're living and the way we see things. For instance, in our built environment, okay, which is integrated into the grid many times, okay, and the whole thing is we can't just keep slapping these PV cells on top of rooftops. They have to become part of what we're building out there so that agriculturally, architecturally, they start being benefit to this. The second one that's kind of creeped into this, and we heard a little bit on this, is the terawatt problem. I don't think there's a terawatt problem. I think that there's a terawatt hour problem. And I think this was really said before a couple of times in that right now, photovoltaics is given completely into the power sector. And somehow our solar technologies have to expand these other sectors that we heard before into buildings and transportation. And this is where the grid is going to be key. Okay, this idea of one grid is key to this whole thing of expanding the use of these solar technologies to expand the kilowatt hours. I think that that earlier it was said that good idea if we were able to be able to use the grid to do this as well. And the last area I'll talk about is the nature of the grid itself. And the nature of the grid, we heard a lot about it, modernizing the grid and everything. This cannot be your grandfather's grid that's considering for this one grid for the world. And just an incredible, innovative idea. I think we have to think beyond this. And I'm going to go and quote from someone who I know there in my experience of reading a lot in the literature from Ashok Jhunjhunwala, who's from IIT Madras, who has been pushing a lot of about the use of DC in commercial buildings, the use of DC on microgrids and everything on this whole thing. And this is certainly something that makes its way into the grid itself. You know, this is the problem of always the discussion of AC versus DC, of Tesla versus Edison, going back into the early 1900s. And, you know, Edison tried to get rid of AC by executing Topsy the elephant in 1903. And in that same year, Edison said, I would put my money on the sun and solar energy. What a source of power. And in fact, that was his vision. His innovation, okay, was to use DC. Tesla, on the other hand, also at the very same time had put on that solar power was the way for our future. He was a big proponent of energy there on this whole thing. And, you know, the fact is that people are looking at DC grids. on this. And these might be very, very high voltage grids that have low losses, or they might be microgrids that come into this whole thing. Mr. Tripathi showed Einstein, and I'm going to go back and show something else historical here, if you can see this. Okay, you know, we have so much DC, okay, in our systems, whether it's digital equipment, batteries, buildings, vehicles, lightning, all these other things, data centers on this whole thing. It goes back, you know, even into the 1950s. I think maybe I'm the only one around here who was around in the 1950s to see this. And this is the first solar satellite on this, DC powered on this whole thing. And in fact, much of what was done back then on putting in photovoltaics in these early times really has come along, and these things still work. And this is real DC power. And I think we could also consider DC grids. And there's lots of hybrid concepts for the grids of AC on top of the DC and everything else. But I think it's a concept that if we look at having the one grid, we shouldn't just box ourselves into considering, as I said, the old concepts on the grid, but be able to expand on this and don't stamp down innovations, especially in this area. So I know that we're caught for time, but right now, DC microgrids, if you look at the literature, have more published about DC microgrids than AC microgrids, if you check this. So it's an area that is serious and technologically feasible. The downside might be cost and trying to convince these people to go the other way. But you know, but it's an idea that might be the most efficient in the long run. So thank you.
Thanks a lot, Professor Lawrence. I will not even try to summarize today's discussion, but I believe Elon Musk will be very happy with your Tesla and Edison comparison. Jagjit, over to you.
Thank you, Amit, and thanks to all the panelists. This has been a fascinating discussion. As we are coming close to the end of this, let me invite His Excellency Mr. Indushek Chaturvedi, who is in the driving seat of this initiative, you know, at the helms of affairs in Government of India, leading the renewable energy revolution. Without further ado, let me invite him for his closing remarks. Thank you. Over to you, His Excellency.
Thank you very much. Director General ISA, Mr. Tripathi, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. This has been a very fascinating and rewarding session, and I really don't know what I can add to it. Almost everything related, all aspects of the issue have been covered. But let me just concentrate on the implementation mechanisms we need to take this project forward. So IEA's projections suggest that renewables will meet around 80% of the growth in global electricity demand over the next 10 years. And solar will be at the center of this new constellation of electricity generation. Projections also underline the need for strengthening electricity grids to ensure seamless absorption of renewable energy. Undoubtedly, one sun, one world, one grid would add a new dimension to the landscape by allowing transmission of renewable energy across international borders, minimizing curtailment and balancing the interconnected grid through renewable energy sources. Let me just emphasize that we are at the initial stages of the project. The idea of a grid that supplies power all the time with different regions being powered at different times is a fascinating one, with the potential of being great use to the world. That said, the project is going to be extremely challenging to implement. And I say this because I consider it important that we are well prepared to move forward once the consultant's report is received. So far, we have taken care in working out the mechanism to take the project forward. The present mechanism involves the Government of India and two multilateral institutions, the World Bank and the International Solar Alliance. And working out this mechanism itself took some effort with a lot of finer details which needed to be sorted out. And this obviously creates a pool of expertise and experience that should help the project. Implementing mechanisms going forward would have to be even more carefully worked out. These would likely involve multiple ministries and authorities within our country, and also cooperation and careful coordination with other countries. The Ministry of New and Renewable Energy recognizes this, and we are prepared to meet these challenges that lie ahead. India possesses extensive experience of facilitating renewable power evacuation and reshaping the grid for future requirements. We have implemented the Green Energy Corridor project. Focused efforts have been made on strengthening institutions, resources, and protocols, and investing judiciously in grid infrastructure. This experience should help when we start implementing the One Sun, One World, One Grid project. We are committed to providing all possible support for the success of the project. It has been envisioned at the highest level by Honorable Prime Minister of India. Let me end with these words, and I'm sure today's discussions will contribute to the forward movement which is needed in the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for your very wise words and underlying that we need to be mindful of the implementation challenges, but recommitting and reassuring that India would be driving it with all its leadership at highest level, and various arms of governments would be brought together to help shape the implementation. So thank you very much for that. With this, I must also thank the panelists, Gavin for his keynote address, and also my boss, His Excellency Director General Upendra Tripathi, for sparing time for this fascinating discussion. One remark for panelists that we won't let you off the hook. We would be drawing upon your expertise and experience as we move forward, and engaging you in your various capacities to be our ambassadors, our champions for this idea. And we will meet more frequently as we plan to deliver the first concrete deliverables at Glasgow in COP26. With this, I must thank, and a big round of applause for all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you. With this, we conclude this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Have a good day.
Yes, thanks everyone.
Bye.